I would get sent to the principal's office, and I would be confronted by a drunk priest every time.
No.
Oh, yes. So here I am, not understanding Catholicism, not really getting it, not feeling saved or supported in any way.
The assurance of salvation of a loving God.
Yeah, I don't have that. And then I go to this person who's supposed to be the closest to God I can find, and you are red in the face and drunk every time I see you.
In today's episode, we're going to meet Karlee, an outstanding young lady. This is going to be a very different episode from everything else that you guys have heard, but an inspiring story, talking about the struggles and the day-to-day life of a young person in today's society. I know you're going to love it. So welcome to Tea Talks. Karlee.
Yes.
I am so excited about this. I have actually been looking forward for this interview because we have become friends in such a unique way.
We really have.
And this is very special to me. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me.
This is awesome. So this interview is going to be a little different than my usual interviews because you come from a different background than the majority of the people that I'm interviewing.
Yes,
so
I definitely do.
It's definitely very exciting for me to have you here.
Good.
So let's start with you.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about who you are.
Okay. Well, I have a crazy background. I'm born Sicilian. I've been Sicilian my whole life. But culture is very important in my family. So growing up Sicilian in New York is a very specific thing. It's a very specific way of life. And one of those things is being Catholic. Mm. Catholicism wasn't something I was really connected to at all. So growing up with my family...
So you were not connected?
I didn't feel connected to it in a spiritual way. It was more of like we did it because it was just what we did.
Okay.
I had my baptism.
Like a cultural thing.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing. My communion, my confirmation. But after that, I didn't go to church anymore, you know?
Okay.
I was raised by a father who is my best friend on this entire planet. But he's a drummer and he was very much in his own space, and he had a very bad history with Catholicism and with the Catholic Church and with Catholic school. And then my mother, who was raised way more on the Catholic side, my grandmother was so intense into church, but my mother also kind of strayed from it. So we were doing it out of almost like just what we needed to do more than because it was a spiritual thing.
It was like what is socially accepted and actually expected.
Yeah, it was expected for sure.
Yeah. I wasn't raised like in Italy, where I believe that Catholicism is a lot stronger.
It is insane.
I was raised in a country it's not like that anymore. But back in the time that I used to live in Brazil, Catholicism was pretty much what you were talking about too. It was expected. And it was just a checklist, honestly, but you had to go to mass. You had to do all of that. What do you think? I don't know if you were too young, but maybe you can remember from your parents or even from yourself. What do you think it made you not have this connection?
So growing up, my mother was a full-time worker. She's a hairstylist as well.
Okay.
So she worked 12 hours a day. I didn't really have my dad around. They got divorced when I was about 2 years old.
Okay.
So my dad ended up being kind of like my every other week, every other weekend type of person. Hence why he became like the best friend, you know? So when I wasn't with my dad, I was with my grandmother on my mom's side. We call her Mom and Anna. She's a sweetheart. She's 96 now. God bless her. We love her. She's phenomenal. But she was the one that brought me to church every Sunday. And I was kind of used to that schedule. But other than the Sunday, that was kind of all I had. You know, of course, my family would walk around the house and something goes wrong. They're like, oh, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, you know. But that was kind of it. That was like the only connection
The expression.
The expression. My grandmother had me pray before we would go to sleep every night. But we wouldn't pray before meals. It wasn't like that. So as I got older, I had my communion, I had my confirmation, and it felt like every time I would complain about it, like I have to go to this CCD, Tuesday school or whatever it was.
In Brazil, I think it's called the catechism.
Yeah. You would go when you were in public school instead of a Catholic school. So I was in public school my whole life up until high school, which that was only because I was a cheerleader. So I don't know if I should even count that. So once I was complaining about going to CCD, my mom was like, just make the sacraments and then you can decide if you want to continue with it or not. But you have to make the sacraments. And it was just because my family wanted everybody to make the sacraments. So that was how it felt to me. It was like these goals I had to get to with really nothing at the end. It was I just had to make the sacraments and then that was it.
It's so interesting because I also, well, up to I was like 12, 13 years old, I went to public school and I went to CCD on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
Except for the times that I would skip and not go, pretend that I went and I didn't go. Then when I was about 13 years old, I went to Catholic school. And it was exactly the sacraments that drove me crazy. I am a rebellious by nature. And for me, it didn't make sense to have to do those rituals that kind of like you said, it's like it didn't fulfill me. And sometimes I felt something was wrong with me. Like I am the one that was broke. I remember I was about probably like 18 years old and I had a group of friends that started going. Do you remember the Catholic Church at one point had this, I don't know, how did they call it, especially in English, but it's more like, it was like a revival and they had this more, I would say contemporary style of worship for the young people. There was a movement, at least back in Brazil and back then, you know.
Probably not in Staten Island. It was very to the book.
It's still very to the book.
Yes, it very much is.
But so my friends would go and I would go with them because they're going, I'm going. And they were like, oh, this inspired me, that fulfilled me. And I'm like, why don't I feel that? What's wrong with me?
I feel that. That's how I felt. I would be in Mass and I'm just sitting there. And my grandmother would be like with the rosaries and she would feel so connected and she would like be praying up to God. And I would just sit there and be like, this is inspiring. It almost reminded me of horror movies more than anything because like the priest is doing the, you know, the weird monotone melodies. And it reminded me of the horror movies I would watch when I was a kid. You're giving
me so many flashbacks. It's so funny.
It's so bad. Well, not bad, but you know, it's a bad memory because it made me feel so uncomfortable. And then I would do these sacraments and I would feel like, okay, I'm at the next step now. And like it got to a point where my mom was bribing me with Taco Tuesdays at Moe's to get me to go to CCD because I didn't want to.
You gave me a flashback. I remember like vividly. So at this point, I had already become more of a Protestant. It's a whole nother story that I'm not going to get into it because today I'd love to just hear your experience, but a little tad bit of mine too.
Please.
So I had already become Protestant and my brother got married. So, and he got married in the Catholic Church. And I remember walking into the church and all of the saints, that made me feel so scared.
I feel like all these eyes looking at
all of the saints made me feel so scared. And I remember as a child, I was so scared of all of those saints looking at me. It's so interesting how to some people that is something that brings them comfort. But I think that for me, it was scary.
Yeah, it was kind of scary for me too, especially because I feel like Catholicism really focuses on the struggle. And it focuses on almost like the horror and the suffering that Jesus went through. And as a kid, I don't want to watch the crucifixion. Like, I don't want to do that, you know? And I wanted the comfort. I wanted the love and the warmth. And I didn't have any of that. It was very cold to me. Even like going and doing not confirmation. When you tell the priest of your sins, what is
confession?
That? Confession, thank you. When we would go to confession, it was cold. It was just this shadow
and
sitting
then you
in
had
this
to
box with
pray
me.
So many holy how do you call the Mary one? It's we're bad. We're bad.
It was the Our Father.
Our Father.
And oh my gosh.
It's something with Mary. I remember that.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Wow. Yeah.
And he would give me like
Tells you how long I haven't done
I know.
this
And he would give me hundreds of them to pray.
Yeah.
And
Hail Mary.
Hail Mary. There you go. And that was quite interesting. You know?
I feel like all of my experiences within the church was always very cold because of that. I would go and say, you know, oh, I lied to my mom or whatever it was. And he'd be like, all right, 2 Hail Marys and 3 Our Fathers. I'm like, okay. And then I would go and I would do it. And I would be like, so I'm good? So that like exonerates me from all of my sins?
Yeah, that is what started making me question, you know?
Yeah. it was like that weird hierarchy in the church.
Yeah.
I couldn't just talk to God myself. I had to go to a priest to talk to God.
Yes.
And that was an interesting thing.
It's so funny because, by the way, for those that are listening, we met because she's my hairstylist.
I am.
Yeah, and we became friends because every time we go, there's like a therapy session.
Absolutely.
I am sharing all of my troubles. She's sharing all of her troubles, but we never talk about religion.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've touched a little bit, but it's always been a great conversation.
Yes. Yeah. But it's so funny how you're sharing things and it's triggering and flashbacks all over the place, you know, all of these little things that happened to me before. Yeah. But I started having questions very similar to what you're telling me, like, but why do we do this? What is the purpose of that? And the confession was something that really got to me. You know, like,
hated it.
Yes, and it didn't make sense to me. So for me, it was a lot of what you mentioned. Christ's suffering, yes, we wanted to know, we wanted to understand, is the constant focus. I think what it bothered me, it was like we need to punish ourselves to feel what Christ felt, and that's the way, it's kind of like I'm almost buying my way to salvation, you know, like I need to appease God, you know, so that it's one of the things that start making me drift away, and then later on, but the main thing was like I couldn't believe of a God of love that would allow so much suffering.
Yes. You know what that brings me to? Catholic guilt. Catholic guilt is something that has scarred me and many of my friends and family. One of my best friends, she's a sister to me. She lives her life in fear. And it's such a sad thing to see. And she knows I love her with all my heart. And it's little things. It's nothing that serious. But little things like moving on in a relationship in the normal way that we all know in today's world, she feels terrified because she's like, well, no, I just can't. It's just against my religion. And I'm like, but it isn't. You're just looking at it in a very odd way.
And it's hard because when you are conditioned since childhood to feel guilty about everything, shame about everything, you're conditioned to that. That's how you're going to feel the entire time. And I understand because that's one of the problems that I suffer even today. It's been like ages since I got out of that, but it's kind of like when you train your dog. You train your dog, you touch here, you get in trouble. They never, because they're always going to be afraid. Sure, we have to have a good balance between, shame and guilt are something that is biblical, that is in the Bible.
It is, yeah.
But we need
It's a normal human emotion.
It's a normal human emotion. And sometimes it's healthy because it actually keeps you away from something that could hurt you really badly.
Absolutely.
I give an example, like sometimes I didn't hear this so much in the Catholic community, but more in the Protestant community. Like, if you have sex before marriage, you're pretty much going to ruin your life. You're going to die. And at one point, you're like, are they just making them feel guilty? Is this right? Is this wrong? Today, as a mom, as somebody that was pregnant at 16, I understand that the reason why God says, save yourself to marriage. It's not to shame you. It's not to hurt you, but it's to protect you. I know what it was to be pregnant at 16 and rejected by the love of my life. It was the worst feeling. So sometimes we just need to understand the guilt and the shame in a healthy way is good to keep us safe. But at the same time, when it's just to crush somebody, just to humiliate somebody, or just to control you to be what I want you to be. Very
and that's
problematic.
What you feel a lot with the higher ups. And like, I went to Catholic school for 1 year. Didn't go well for me. I got my religion teacher fired. It was a whole thing. That wasn't really my fault though.
You didn't get expelled. They got fired.
They got fired. It was a weird situation, but I was in a Catholic school in Staten Island. And the reason why I'm saying it's specifically in Staten Island is I think that Staten Island is its own world. It's its own community in a weird way. Everybody knows each other. Everybody knows who has what and who's been with who. It's just such a small community. It is still New York City, so there's a lot of diversity. We are one of the boroughs, even though people don't want to say we are. We are. But it's a very tight-knit community. So I went to this Catholic school that I wanted to go to because I was in cheerleading and I accepted onto the varsity team and I thought I'm going because that's what I want to do. And I ended up hyperextending my arm, so I couldn't be on the cheerleading team anymore. So now I'm just in Catholic school. So it was actually very interesting. I went to my social studies class. It was my freshman year, and it was all about religion. It actually was not about Catholicism. It was about everything. Buddhism, Hinduism. I learned everything. That was one of the most interesting classes I've ever taken. So I'm listening to all of this, and then I'm going to my religion class, and then they're talking about Catholicism, and I'm like, this just doesn't add up to me. I'm like, in Hinduism, for example, or in Buddhism, you don't want to kill any of God's creatures. Even if it's an insect, it's still God's creature. That makes sense to me. I get that. In Catholicism, it was very like, well, don't kill because that's a sin. That's a commandment. You don't want to break the commandments. So I was living my life in this way of, well, I'm not going to hit my friend and I'm not going to lie to my mother because these are commandments and I can go to hell. Not because don't hit your friend because that's not okay, and don't lie to your mother because that's not okay.
Killing is bad.
Killing is bad, not killing is breaking a commandment. It was like a different way of learning. Then I would go to detention quite a bit. I questioned a lot. There was a point where my all of the students around me would be like, I don't want to take this religion test. Can you just start an argument? And I'll be like, yeah, absolutely. And I would argue with this religion teacher for hours. It was so bad. I don't think anybody should do this, but that was how I think I made more sense of the religion.
That was your young years. That was Karlee before.
Yeah, and my dad would be like, you want to really rattle them? Say this. And I'm like, don't do that.
Your father.
And my dad was very funny about it. He would send me to CCD and be like, bring up this topic and see how they squirm. And I'm like, don't do that. So that was what's in my head, right? I would get sent to the principal's office and I would be confronted by a drunk priest every time.
No.
Oh, yes. So here I am, not understanding Catholicism, not really getting it, not feeling saved or supported in any way.
The assurance of salvation of a loving God.
Yeah, I don't have that. And then I go to this person who's supposed to be the closest to God I can find. And you are red in the face and drunk every time I see you. Yeah.
Wow.
And I met him before I went to high school, actually. Fun fact, my mom dated a guy that was working in the school before I was even in high school. I think I was in maybe middle school. And this priest was a friend of his, and he was at dinner once. And I was very excited because I was a middle school kid. And I was like, I learned the act of contrition. Can I say it for you? And I was really excited about it. Still remember it word for word. And he said, yeah, absolutely. I want to hear it. So the only way I, for some reason, was able to remember this was to say the prayer very fast. Because it was just the way my brain worked. I don't know. So I sat there and I just spitted out this prayer as fast as I could. And he looked at me and he said, now, if you slow it down, it would actually have some meaning. Oh. And this is 8-year-old me, maybe not 8, I don't know, 9-year-old me, being like, wow, I thought that was cool that I learned that. I'm not supposed to know this for another 2 years, My grandmother taught it to me. I was really proud of it.
You wanted to find acceptance. You wanted to find the approval from this person that you admire.
Yeah.
And they shut you down.
It
breaks my heart.
And then they had the nerve to look at me drunk in the face and tell me I'm wrong. We're in high school. And I was like,
And all of your efforts. Today, I have a completely different understanding of religions. And I know all of those repetitive prayers is not really what God is looking for.
No.
But for 8-9-year-old that was so proud of memorizing that, it's something that scars us.
Yeah. It was that and the preamble I remembered. And I was so proud of myself.
I don't know any of the names because my Catholic era was in Portuguese.
Yeah.
So a lot of the stuff you're saying, I don't know exactly what it is.
I'm talking about the preamble for the Bill of Rights for the U.S.
Oh,
That
okay.
was the other thing I remembered.
Well, not raised here.
Yeah, exactly. But they were the two weird pieces of history, I guess you could call them, that I remembered. It was the prayer and this one weird thing from the U.S. Constitution that I remembered. And I was so proud of my memory. And I got shot down. But I said the preamble to my mother, and she made me feel very good about that. So that made me feel better. But it's weird. It's weird when your leaders aren't leading.
Yeah.
They're not leading by example at all.
Talking about leading and young people, because that's what is dear to my heart.
Absolutely.
It's I have a passion and a love for young adults, especially because that's when I had my own encounter with God, you know, because I went through, so like I told you, I was young and I would go to church and I would feel like something's wrong with me because I don't feel it.
Yeah.
Then I became a full-on atheist.
Yeah.
I hated on God because I was like, for me, it doesn't make sense to have a love of God that allowed me to go through all of the suffering that I went through. So either God doesn't exist or he's evil. And I prefer to believe that he didn't exist than to believe that God would be evil. So I became atheist. Later on, I had my own personal encounter with God, which is something that for a lot of people, they're like, oh, this could be just coincidence. This could be, yeah, it could. But for me, only the person who experienced can really understand. So, and I was a young adult at the time. I was going through something really hard. And that's why I have this passion to help young people. It's not a specific, like, you have to become part of my church. No, I want to care and show love of God for the young people like you that you didn't see that growing up.
Yeah.
Right? How do you, first of all, I have two-part question.
Okay.
What do you think are the biggest struggles for young adults today? And I'm talking about outside of the church, because at this point, I'm just assuming you're not part of any church.
I'm not.
Okay. So
technically I am.
Technically,
I am with a Catholic church
where
I live.
Okay.
But again,
don't
more
go to church.
It's a culture thing.
Got it. But you don't participate in church.
I don't,
so let's just say a young person like you that does not participate in church, what are the struggles that you go through?
Mainly, oh God, that's a loaded question.
Yes. And you can have like hundreds of answers. Yes. You can pick one.
I feel like the main thing is self-worth is a big one. Being a young woman in this world is hard as it is, with body image, with, you know, models on magazines that you're just constantly focused on. Also being raised by one of the most beautiful women on this planet.
Wow.
I'm constantly comparing, you know, and that was always a struggle of mine. You know, my story about gaining all this weight in a very short period of time. It was a hormone situation. I've never felt so
Which you lost a lot of weight and you're looking great.
Thank you so much. It's been 35 pounds. Anyway, but because of that, it made me feel so low on my self-esteem, you know, and I've never felt that low in my life. That is something that I think a lot of young adults struggle with, a lot of young women struggle with. Knowing their self-worth, knowing what is important to them, specifically with themselves, and then knowing how to do that in a relationship as well. I'm a firm believer that you can't love somebody without loving yourself. So that was something I struggled with a lot in the last year. Finances is the other thing. Somebody please tell me how to do my taxes. Can somebody help me? Because I don't get it. I own my own business and I am like so struggling. I don't know what to do. So finances is a big thing. Obviously, like, things have changed over the years, and it has been way harder for now young adults, millennials, whatever you want to call them, to buy a house, to buy a car, to be able to have kids comfortably. That hasn't really been a thing lately. People are struggling and people are having a hard time understanding that. And I think that is like the main thing. But yeah, I would say like finances for sure, self-esteem for sure.
My quick advice on finance.
Yeah, tell me.
Because as a pastor, we are self-employed for Social Security we're self-employed for Social Security and we're employed for federal taxes. After wrecking my brain, just let a professional do it. Girl,
you know,
just give it to them.
And I do. And then they ask me these questions. I'm like, I don't know. Why are you asking me? I have no idea what you're talking about.
I know. We can talk about that
it's a whole other thing.
It's a whole nother thing. But yes, I am with you. I think identity, self-worth, help with finances, and like all of the huge transitions that happen right after you graduate, you know? And
your life just changes.
It changed completely. What do you think? Let me ask this way. Do you think church leaders, church members could help young adults that are going through these transitions?
I think absolutely.
And I just say church members because we want to believe that someone that believes in Christ is more willing to want to help than somebody that doesn't have that. But by the way, there's good people everywhere.
Absolutely.
In every religion.
Absolutely.
So it's not only limited to that. I'm just asking this question because this is something that I want to learn as a church leader.
So I feel like as somebody who just, I'm never going to really label myself anymore. After being labeled as a Catholic my whole life, I'm kind of like, I don't know what I am. I wouldn't even call myself an atheist because I do believe in something.
Okay.
But I think being there for somebody, even if it isn't necessarily like, oh, well, have you been going to church? It's more of, well, how are you? What are you doing? And I think in our relationship, you're the only Catholic Christian person that is in my life that guides me in any way.
I'm guiding you.
Absolutely. Listen, those therapy sessions are for me too. Do not worry. But, you know, I definitely feel like you are that connection for me. So as somebody who is a church personnel, you are helping me in any way, not necessarily just helping me get closer to God, but you're there to guide me in just a normal way, be there for me. And I think that's just in your heart, regardless of the church. But it does help that you obviously are included in the church. And if I was seeking the church, I would go to you before anybody else.
Make me want to cry.
But I mean, it's just, you're the connection for me, you know? Where with my grandmother, if I want to get closer to Catholicism, I'm going to her. She's my connection there. And I have beautiful coworkers that work with me that are very Christian and go to church every Sunday and really like give their income to the church and are very involved. And I love that for them. I love that they found peace in that they found love in that. And even though I don't fully understand that, I still have that connection to it. And they're not church personnel. They go to church. But I think with your question, I would say being there as a human first.
Like a mentor. Like,
yes.
Not like, did you go to church today? Did you go to CCD? But more like, how are you doing?
Right.
If it leads to, hey, I think church would be good for me.
Right.
Great. But otherwise, just be there for them without having an agenda.
Yeah. Like one of my good friends, she works with me and I obviously am an open book and I'm like, this is wrong and this is wrong and I need help. And she first will just sit there and say, you know, how about X, Y, and Z? And we go through all the issues and all the solutions, same like you do with me. And then every once in a while, there'll be like a little thing where she's like, well, you know, I was listening to this one sermon and he said this and it really opened my eyes to this. That's great information. I love that. Because even if it isn't church related, or if it is church related, it's still in the real world good advice, regardless of the religion, right? Where there are some people that I've talked to in my life where I would say, you know, I just don't understand, my AC broke, whatever. And they would be like, well, did you pray about it? And I'm like, praying is not going to fix my AC as much as I wish it would. Like, it's so unrelated. And that's like all they talk about, to a point where I feel like I'm not getting any advice from you. I'm only getting the God stuff, you know?
You're touching something that I have always questioned if I'm doing right or wrong, because I was atheist and I hated when people would come to me and say, just pray about it. You need to have faith. And I had a neighbor. So I lived upstairs, she lived downstairs, and she made her life mission to change my lifestyle. This was before I became a Christian, okay? I was still an atheist. And she would come with the craziest things. She would come and one day she was like, Chris, you need to change your lifestyle. Now, you need to do that now because we found what is the mark of the beast. And I didn't even ask, okay, what is it? Because at this point, I'm not interested. And I'm like, I'm just looking at her. The barcode in the product, that's the mark of the beast.
What?
Yeah, there's a whole theological reason why she got to that today I understand why she thought of that. But my point is, I hate it when people did that to me. I hate it. And for me, she was a loony. And because of that, I kept being pushed more and more farther away from ever wanting to know God or believe in Christianity because of that.
Right.
You know? And the problem is, this is the biggest challenge that we have. We have traumas like you had when we were Catholics. But then we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We think that everything is like that. And then when this lady who was a Christian came to me and she would talk like that, I would think that our believers were loonies,
right?
You know? So then now, when I purposely avoid talking about religion with people. And sometimes I question, am I being ashamed of the gospel? Am I being ashamed of Christ? Or am I using the right way? Because honestly, it's not that I wanted to make you my denomination, but I want to bring you closer to Christ. Right. I want to do that with everyone.
Right.
But I want to make it in a way that people are not going to be like turned off, like, like with the craziness.
Well, and that's the hard, weird thing to bear, right? It's like, okay, what side of the line are you going to be on? And as somebody who isn't religious, I don't want people who are going to be like, well, you just have to come to Christ. You have to give your life to Christ. I'm like, I don't even know this dude. What do you mean give my life to him? Like, what?
You said exactly the same phrase that I used to say. I used to say, like, Jesus saved me. Saved me from what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
And you know, I think it's also growing up out of Catholicism with my mother. My mother, till the day she dies, will always be like, I'm Catholic. And I totally understand that for her. She grew up that way. Her whole family's that way. But the thing that she taught me was more about spirituality than it was a full religion. And I think that's way more attractive to me than saying I am specifically this religion. And I feel like I've touched with you saying how it's hard for me to say that God is a solitary thing. It's a solitary person. You know, when you're a kid, you hear about God and you're like, oh, there's a man in the sky. It's obviously not how it works. But for me, it felt like, well, why can't everything just be energy? You know, the world is made up of energy. This table is made up of energy. So for me, God isn't a solitary person. For me to say I believe in God feels wrong to me because I don't feel like that's my truth. But to say I believe in the universe and energy everywhere, all around me.
I see where you are now.
See what I'm saying? That to me is a little bit more comforting because I'm feeling like I'm getting a hug from the universe constantly. And if you want to call that God, great, awesome. But for me, I call it more the universe. I say, you know, it's the universe is showing me signs. The universe is doing this. And
while I went to atheism, you went more like the universe.
I'm definitely more of a science person. You know, my dad and I grew up looking out at the telescope all day. You know, like that was kind of our thing. So seeing the planets and seeing, you know, what this universe is made of is such a beautiful thing and such a cool thing, you know?
It's so interesting, but I can't get into this now because we would be talking for another hour.
And we easily could.
Yes. Because exactly what drove you to have that view of God is what drove me to have the God doesn't exist, period.
Right,
everything is a coincidence. There was a big explosion. Everything is a result of evolution and all of that kind of stuff. There was a change to my understanding, my belief that we don't have time to get in now, but I understand where you are. And when you're saying, like, before you mentioned something about your coworkers, that they are dedicated to church, they give their money to church, that's something that you can't understand. I get you. Yeah. Because for the longest time, I was like, how can they do this? Yeah. You know, like, I don't get it.
I could barely afford dog food. I'm going to give my income to you. I can't afford that.
I get it. I understand. I was there. Yeah. Today, I'm in a different, complete place. But what happens is, remember when I told you that we would go to this different style of worship service that everybody felt fulfilled and I didn't? The reason why nothing made sense to me as far as giving the money to, I remember one time there was a lady sitting back behind me. This was like the first time that I went to a Christian church. I wasn't there yet, but I went because of somebody else. And she wrote a check for $20. Honestly, $20 is nothing. But I was so upset because this lady was somebody very close to me. And she was nanny. She didn't make a lot of money. And for me, giving $20 to the church was ridiculous, you know, because I'm used to go to the Catholic church that you barely give your $1, you know?
And with my family, they were given a lot more than $1 and they were struggling so much. Like some of my aunts, my mom's one of 6. So you can imagine this huge family in church. Yeah. I had aunts that were struggling just having babies, 2-3 babies at a time to figure things out. And they only had $10 left for the week and they gave the church $5. Yeah. Oh.
All of that did not make sense to me. And all of, let's say, even in my church, there's still some traditions that I am not a traditional person. And I don't like rituals. And I think it's probably because of my Catholic traumas.
Yeah.
But I don't like traditions. I didn't like the tradition. I didn't like giving the money. I didn't like a lot of the stuff. But it was when I had finally my own encounter with God that I decided to search, hold it. What is really in the Bible? What is just made up traditions? Because this is the thing, and this is me, okay? Supposedly there's one God. You believe in the energy and the universe and all of that, but majority of the world believe there's one God.
Yes, right.
Not even the Bible. Let's say Hindu, Buddhism. Everybody believes in one God. How can this one God tell one person this, the other person this, the other person this? How come there's so many denominations, even in a Christian church? So for me, that made absolutely no sense. So when I was starting to give a chance to God, the first thing I did was, if there is a God, there's got to be one way that is the truth. And I started studying exactly what you did, that you said that you had a class, that you had classes with Hindus and Buddhism and all of that. I did the same thing. I studied
really interesting.
every religion that you can imagine. And so I would not go insane. I had to choose one guide, not a religion yet.
Okay.
At this point, I started looking like at the, how do you say, like the major religions, because you have some little offshoots, but like the major ones. And I started looking for if they had what did they follow? What was their guide? And from that is where I chose the Bible. By the way, I don't like to take the Bible and say, this is the truth, the only truth. And, I don't like to do that because this generation doesn't like ultimatums. They don't like,
they don't like absolutes.
They don't like absolutes.
Sure.
So I respect what everybody chooses. But my choice was, because I actually did research. I was all about history and science, kind of like what you said. And I chose the Bible. And from accepting that God exists and studying the Bible for myself and no longer accepting other people telling me is where I have now the understanding that I have about God. So it was a long journey, but now when I give money, now when I go to worship, now I'm fulfilled.
Yeah.
But I needed to have this encounter with God because it's kind of like, and I really appreciate everything you said about me.
Of course.
But it's almost like, first we developed a friendship to be able to have this kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same way with God. First, you need to develop your relationship with God to be able to understand who God really is before it makes sense to you to write $100 check to give for the cause, like something in that direction.
Absolutely. And like when I was growing up, my dad was actually pulled into the priest's office one day. It was after CCD. And he said, I noticed your daughter isn't going to church, because in Catholicism, we have like these little envelopes that track if you've donated and if you've been to mass, pretty much. So my envelope number has not come up that often. And he basically was like, I noticed your daughter isn't going to church. Like, we need to fix that. My dad is very not about this, obviously. So he's like, listen, this is her mother's thing. This is not my thing. Like, you want to bring this up, bring it up to her mother, not me. I will not be bringing her to church. That is my thing, right? So he said to my dad, well, don't you want your daughter to go to heaven? And he said, Karlee, go wait outside. I still don't know what happened in that room when I left. But my dad got into the car with me and he said, I need you to know that your wealth, whether you're poor, wealthy, whatever you are, what you decide to give to whatever cause you believe in does not tell you if you are going to heaven or hell. You need to know that, because you did not donate to church does not mean that you're going to hell. And that was something that was such a correlation in my mind growing up that I'm like, I'm not giving the church anything, because like, no. That's like, it's like it felt like a scam to me.
Got it.
Where I'm like, oh, you only care if I'm here, if I'm giving you money, but you don't care if I'm just here because I want to be here.
Although your father is not religious, not part of any church or anything, he's not wrong. He's completely right.
Yeah.
And
he is most of the time, unfortunately.
What I appreciate is the fact that your dad defended you.
Oh, absolutely.
even sometimes what it hurts me is that a lot of parents, a lot of teachers, even pastors, they don't try to understand where that young person is in their journey, and threatening them with hell. It's not the way to bring them to Christ.
And to paint this picture for you, I was 7 years old. 7 years old, terrified of hell. Terrified. And this man is telling me if I don't give money, I'm going to hell. That was what was said to my face.
Wow.
I know.
I am sorry.
Isn't that terrible?
Yes.
But that's where the correlation started.
Okay,
So
I was not going to touch anything about doctrines in this, but let me tell you, hell is not what they say it is.
I know.
I think we need to study together so I can tell you what
that.
it is.
Yes, absolutely. Because that was like a fear of mine growing up was, but I might go to hell. Oh my God, I don't want to be there. Like the worst thing you could ever think of was hell, you know? So that's the hard part, you know?
Karlee, we didn't even get to everything that we wanted to get. But this was so wonderful.
We will do another for sure.
We will have to do a second one.
There's so many more things we need to touch on.
There's so much more that we need to get to it.
Absolutely.
But I loved spending this time with you, getting to know you a little more, and I love who you are.
Thank you so much. I love you with all my heart.
Thank you.